Hello again and welcome back. I hope you've taken the time while your first layers are drying to grab a cup of tea, maybe go out and sit in the sun, have a bit of breath of fresh air. Now we're going to get into our next layers. So once again, what we're going to do is pick 3 colors. Each time I step up to the canvas, I like to flip it at least 180 degrees, sometimes more, depending on what excites me. Usually I'll flip it more as I get further along in the process, because every time you turn it, it looks completely different. So, as I said, with the first layers, we did mostly warm colors. I've kept the color that I use to write on my palette, and then I've also added a couple of cooler colors, which is a turquoise and a green, and I've also added white. Anything you mix with white will actually cover anything else that you put it over. Any straight colors that you have, blues, turquoises, greens, anything clean that doesn't have a lot of white in it, pure tones, jewel tones, will tend to make a nice layer over top showing detail and previous layers through them without covering over them. I'll show you what I mean in a minute. And if you do want to blend, like say you have areas that you want to cover over, you can do that in the next stage. If you want to add patterns, if you have more writing, if there's images or thoughts that have occurred to you, then you can start to incorporate those as well. You may find that with your first layers, you had some different ideas come up, or memories. It might have triggered some of the feelings about the building that you visited in your visioning. As I said, the twig fort in that I mentioned in the visioning. And you'll notice the more into the creativity process we get, words will stop coming because we're using 2 different sides of our brains when we're doing this, and trying to talk while doing it is going to be difficult for me. So bear with me. But one of the things that you'll notice, like for me, the twig fort, that was actually what popped up in my head, which is why I mentioned it. I used to spend a lot of time outdoors as a child, and it was a fun thing for me to do, was to go out, build myself these little lean-tos out of sticks and twigs and leaves, and then get in them. And it was like a comfy, safe space that I created for myself outdoors, and it always smelled of moss and that spicy, decomposing leaf smell, and it was always such a warm, depending on the time of the year, usually damp but embracing, protective feeling. And I have a lot of emotions about that image itself that came up, because, and not all of them are good, of course. I spent a lot of time outside as a child because home was not awesome. So for me, I get mixed feelings, because I have the feelings of the space that I created for myself in nature, but then I also have the feelings of why I created those spaces. So things like that may come up for you. It does happen where people cry during this process. You might laugh, you might dance. Make sure you drink enough fluids. Tea, water, things like that, good for you. I usually go with herbal tea while I'm painting, just so that I don't get too jittery. And just be gentle with yourself, because this process can bring up some memories. And we will work in anything that comes up that is uncomfortable or makes you sad. And through this process, we can actually change it, as I was talking about in one of the previous videos, into something beautiful that it doesn't hurt to look at, that feels good and that you can think of as a part of your future, as opposed to something that you remember from your past that maybe upset you. So depending on what sort of building came up for you in your visioning, it might have triggered some memories. So don't shy away from those. We'll be using them and incorporating them. In these next layers, as I said, if you started with warm colors, then your next layer you'll want to be cool colors. For me, that's what I'm doing. If you started with cool colors like blues and things like that, then you can switch to your warm colors. Anything that feels good. If it feels comforting or energizing or tasty, if it makes you think of a favorite food, go towards whatever draws you in. Just 3 colors and then white, and we'll get into it. And you'll hear the puppy snoring in the background because he's sleeping. In between the videos, I take him out for walks and we play in the yard and sit in the sun. So you'll hear him sleeping most of the time because I try to tire him out so he doesn't, help too much. So I'm just wetting it down. It smells good. Just wetting it down a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this dark color that is just feeling super tasty right now, and I am loving just this spot. And you don't have to pick out spots yet. If you don't want to, that's no problem. If it's too early for you in the process. But I am, for some reason, just really enjoying this one. So I'm just gonna pull him out like this. Like I said, I had both good feelings and dark feelings about the imagery that I got. So I'm going to work with that right now. I'm going to start with a little bit of a dark color. And you'll see how that will change with time and with the layers. And again, we're going to use this color in 2 other spots on the canvas to make sure that it balances itself out handily. And I'm still not planning anything. I'm still not trying to make anything be anything or happen. I'm just playing with it, seeing if there's anything that really speaks to me in this layer. There doesn't have to be. There could be literally nothing that interests you in this first layer. It happens. But for me, there's a couple of really interesting spots on the canvas for me right now. And I'm going to work with those a little bit and see where they go. Basically all this does is it pulls out those spots that are kind of fascinating you and gets you out of your head, back into the colors, back into the process itself. And you can see it's making really interesting drips and fun stuff over there. And this is why, another reason why you flip it is because you get all sorts of different things happening every time you flip it. It gives you new opportunities for things to change and get interesting, or more interesting, as it were. And the loudly snoring puppy in the background, I apologize. He really gets into it. And then I'm just going to put, I'm really feeling like I need some drips right over here. And this is still just a time when we're exploring with our colors, trying different things on. Things will come forward, things will disappear, and that's totally fine. Oop. And that was a squeaky toy. That will happen frequently because he leaves them right where I'll step on them. It's kind of his thing. He likes to see if he can manage to get me to step on them several times a day. Why? I don't know. It really amuses him. So I let him have that. And you'll notice I do a lot of the dripping in the first few layers because it creates interesting patterns that may or may not stay later. It creates interesting intersections. It makes things happen that we might not notice right away. Maybe until after it's dried, and then we're like, oh, wow, what was that? And that's part of the fun. And part of this particular layer, again, we're still making marks, we're still making interesting patterns, things that might blend into one another in the sections. This is all giving you a base for that inner landscape. Because we haven't yet, other than the colors that we've seen in the inner landscape, we haven't yet started really creating what we saw, or even attempting to. We may not even in the end. Right now, we are just feeling into what we're doing. We're feeling into the sensations of painting, of the brush moving over the canvas. We're feeling into the sensations of what we're trying to do, and just letting ourselves be. You know, we're not trying to make ourselves have a destination yet. It's mainly, still at this point, exploration. It's all colors, patterns, and if you do things more than 3 times, like I talked about the 3s before, then you want to go to 5, because you want to make sure that you have odd numbers. It's just an art thing. Aesthetically speaking, the human mind feels more comfortable with odd numbers than it does with even numbers. There are, of course, people that absolutely must have balance and even numbers. But at the same time, you're still going to find that your eyes will be drawn to odd numbers of things. And try that out. Use that as something that you're going to start to try to notice in the times when you're not painting. See how exactly your mind processes that information. Because it's something that will give you a lot of information on how you perceive the world. I don't want any more of that right now. So, and that's another thing you'll notice too, is you'll go, over time, some people notice it right away, but over time you'll notice that you'll go to put more of a color on the canvas and it doesn't feel like you have anywhere that you want to put it. So don't. Put it on your compost canvas and carry on. Because it's just that inner voice inside of you saying, okay, we're moving on to a different color now. And that's totally fine. So, I'm feeling this green, but I'm not feeling it as a green necessarily. I'm feeling more like a light pastel-y sort of thing happening here with this green. I don't know why. And I was going to go somewhere, and I don't remember where I was going. And this is where you might start getting into funny blendings and weird colors, because with the canvas still being so wet, you are going to find that the colors will mix together and you'll get some pretty weird shades. This one right now, in my mind, I'm having an idea of like a pastel-y sort of green, though I know not why. But I'm not a big pastel color person. But I'm just kind of feeling, I think it's the softness that I'm craving. And you can see how it covers over everything that was in behind and just leaves the part that you wanted to isolate. And he's snoring hardcore, which is very cute. You'll notice I talk to him and about him quite frequently. Some people have children. I have pets, who are basically my children. They're my fur babies. And they are a huge part of my life. They are another part of my inner landscape, and they're like my therapy creatures. And I love them very much. So you will notice that I will speak on them and to them frequently. I apologize if that annoys anyone, but I can't help it. They're such a big part of my life that I can't not talk about them. And again, I'm not getting super precious about it. I'm just finding things that interest me, pulling them out a little bit. And you don't have to do this in every painting. In fact, it gets kind of repetitive if you do. But it is kind of fun to pull out these strange patterns that are happening and find interesting bits of color. And I'm kind of feeling you can use your brush itself as a tool for creating pattern. I'm just using the flat of the brush and giving it a nice little smoosh. And I'm still working in that green. I think I'm going to work in the white a little bit too. But right now I'm feeling that funny green. So I'm going to keep going with him until I get tired of him. But he does feel pretty good. And again, if you do a pattern, like smooshing with the brush, it's good to do it in a couple other places too. Just feels good. For the brain and the eyes. And try not to go too heavy like I just did, or it'll take forever to dry. Which can be fun sometimes. But it makes for very long video sessions, if that's the case. But like I said, in between, if you do lay on a lot of color and a lot of water, then, get a cup of tea. Have a sit. Journal. It's good to journal all the way through. Every time you stop painting, it's good to grab your journal and write a little bit about how you're feeling in this layer, what the colors made you feel, why you picked those colors, what interests you about the painting, what you don't like about the painting. You might hate it. It's going to go through several ugly phases, so be prepared for that. There will be several times where you're going to hate it passionately, which is okay. It's bound to happen. And this white, this is just like a stick. It's from an air freshener, old air freshener. And I'm just feeling into these little white speckles for some reason. And again, these will take a while to dry, so be warned. They can really eat into your painting time. And sometimes you can see here where the paint is still wet from the running from the water. It has a hard time sticking to the canvas because it's just so wet. So you can, if you want, before adding white bits and dots and things, or any kind of light colors or tiny things that might interest you or textures, you can wait until it dries a little bit more. You don't have to be as eager as I am. I'm just enjoying myself. I sometimes will get into it so much that I will just paint like 2 layers at once, which can be fun, but it also can get very messy. As you can see when I flipped my canvas around, it dripped all over the floor, which is why I said to have plastic or a drop cloth or something, because you can ruin carpets doing this a lot. They can be deeply ruined. So I am literally just working, I always have plastic drop cloth under a fabric drop cloth in my easel, because I make messes. And one of the things you can also do with the stick, like say you've got a thick layer here, if a word comes to you again, like it does in the previous layers that I had, you can scratch it out and it'll show through underneath. Or you can scratch little patterns and the color underneath will show through. So it's quite fun because you can get right into the different textures, pulling out colors and textures. Like I said, right now we are dealing mostly with the colors that were in our visions. We're not yet dealing in detail. Right now we're just dealing in color. And I really like how that's going, so I'm going to go back over these guys and scratch them and move them around so that they become scribbly tangles instead of sticky marks, which makes it quite fun. And I don't know, it's all in what feels good. So listen to yourself and what might feel good, inspiring, interesting. Try different things. Paint with your fingers. I will often take 3 fingers and it'll create, makes a mess, mind you. You're going to be covered in paint. But it makes really interesting patterns, especially on wet spots where it doesn't necessarily all stick to the right spot where you want it. Then it creates this really good base of interesting textures that are going to show up underneath everything else that you do. You're basically giving yourself a base layer for what we're going to do after. So this, you don't have to be precious with it. You don't have to worry about any of the patterns, marks, things that you've isolated. You may lose them completely again anyway. So it might not, none of what you've just done might show up later in the finished painting. And some people get freaked out by that. They see, as a waste of paint, but it really isn't, because all of the textures, all of the layers, the words, what will happen is in subsequent layers, it will cause drips to run in different directions. It'll cause different shapes to happen, things that would never have happened if those layers underneath hadn't been there. So we are building layers with necessary colors and necessary amounts of paint. And we'll just keep doing that and keep building. And then this will be your second layer, and once this dries, then we'll move on to yet another layer. We'll turn it again, and I want you to do this. You can do it, you can wait until the next video and do it, or you can do it now. And once you're, well, not now, but once your paint dries, flip it again and do the same thing again. Go through, pick out pieces. If you use cool colors, use warm colors next time, and vice versa. And then just keep building. And then in the next video, we're going to start pulling out some of the different layers again in another direction. So I hope this has been fun and interesting for you, and I will see you in a little bit. Enjoy.